coloring with grayscale actually is a lot easier than you think. Today I'm going to show you a couple of my favorite techniques, my favorite mediums to use when coloring a grayscale image, and I'm hoping that this will help you not be so intimidated. When you color with your medium, whether it's alcohol markers or colored pencils, the gray from the grayscale comes through and actually creates that depth for you. The grayscale shows you where your shading and highlights need to go. I love coloring grayscale images. They pop off the page when you shade and highlight using two different mediums, especially if you're using an alcohol marker and then a colored pencil or a chalk pastel on top for the highlights. Your work is going to be amazing. Let's get into it. I'm going to show you a couple of tricks and also some of my favorite supplies for coloring with the grayscale images. I like to use a page protector to go in between my pages. I've slipped a couple pieces of plain paper in between so the image behind doesn't come through. I would be using alcohol markers for her shirt and hair, and I would pick out those colors ahead of time. So before I get started with showing you my tips, I wanted to show you some of the tools and accessories that I use for coloring the adult coloring books. To start off with, I find it easier to use these magnifying glasses. My eyesight's not that great, so these really help, and it's quite comfortable, and I don't even realize that I'm wearing it. And the lens is also movable, so this is really a great tool that I've really enjoyed using recently. So that's the first thing I use. The next thing I like to use for coloring the pages is, I'm just going to move these over. First thing I like to use is the alcohol markers. So I've been using the Ohuhu alcohol markers and also the Aptastar that I got from Amazon. I do like the Ohuhu brush tips. The Aptastar doesn't come in the brush tip. It's only got a fine point and a chisel tip, but they are pretty vibrant and not too bad price-wise. So I've enjoyed using these for some projects. Now they don't blend as nicely, obviously, as the Ohuhu markers, so I've been mostly using these. This is what I use to lay down the base if I'm doing a page with a lot of area to cover. Then I use my colored pencils over top. So generally what I will do is, if I'm using a color, I will choose 2 or 3 coordinating colored pencils to go with that color. What that will do is, when you lay the base down in your alcohol marker, you take the darker color and that's what you use to lightly shade the areas that require shading. Where you see the shadows, where the grayscale is gray, is where you're going to shade. Where the grayscale is light or there is no gray, that's where you're going to use your lighter color over top of the alcohol marker. So I will go in depth and show you a little bit about that as we go along. The other things I like to use are 2 kinds of smudging tools. So this is actually a blending stump, which is a funny word. And I also have a blending tool, which is a soft tip at this end, which is like a sponge, and this is more like a hard felt tip edge, and this is used to burnish. When you're using these smudging tools to use a very light hand and not to blend everything into too much together too quickly. Make sure you're layering enough so you're getting your colors exactly how you want them before you start blending and burnishing. Here we have a colorless blender, which is essentially a colored pencil without any color. So it looks like it might be white, but it's actually no color at all. It does the same sort of thing as the burnishing tool here. It blends everything together, but it's also going to burnish your colors into a waxy texture. So just use care and make sure you're done with all of your layering of your colored pencils before you start using the blending tools. Next, I do enjoy using a very nice white marker for highlights. My current favorite is the Sharpie brush tip, and I also have a Sharpie bullet point and the Posca. These are all acrylic white markers. And let's have a look at the bullet tip and the brush tip. So they are quite different. They do deposit quite a bit of white, but I find that they are not quite as opaque as the Posca for their white, but I do love using these markers. So these are the white highlights that I do like to use for some of the details. And for the Sharpies, they come in an array of colors, so you have a lot to choose from if you're doing any stippling or any details. Next is the Jelly Roll pens. These are gel pens that I use to add some details, and they are fun. Next, I use the Ohuhu glitter markers. They are a lot of fun as well, just for adding details, little sparkles. I sometimes use the silver for snowflakes or anything that's got a sparkle, but they do come in an array of colors as well that are a lot of fun. And lastly, I've been using chalk and oil pastels for some of my art pages. I have found that adding a little bit of the chalk pastels makes it a little more forgiving, brightens it up a little bit where maybe you might have had a heavier hand than you wanted to. It does allow you to make a little bit of adjustments to your page if you have gone a little heavier than you were expecting with your shading, or the color's just not what you're thinking. Adding a little bit of white and blending it in really lightly with your blenders just makes them come to life. So those are the supplies that I love using for my adult coloring pages. And I think, oh, one more. I do occasionally use an eraser. So these erasers are great at getting, it's not motorized or whatever those are. It's simply just a little eraser in a pen form. Make a little mistake or you go over a line, you can tidy it up quite easy. Let's get into doing a little bit of a test page. We are going to color a page from Retro Rockabilly, which is an adult coloring book with a grayscale image. I've chosen my dress color, my hair color, skin color, and eye color. What I do is I just separate everything so I don't get them mixed up. I'll start with the dress. I'll end with the face and the skin. I only use colored pencils for the skin tones. It just makes it easier for me. So a good thing to note here is that when you are using the alcohol marker, it doesn't matter if it's fully saturated. It kind of adds to the dimension of the fabric that I haven't gotten it so perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect. And with the grayscale, and with it being grayscale, the pattern comes through. So now let's shade the dress a little bit closer so you can see some of the details here. Just follow where there's shadows with your little, I'm really just using a light touch here. And it's just adding a tiny bit of shading to the skirt and the dress. And you can add in little shadows wherever you like as well. I usually like to, if there's a belt or if there's a hem or her arm, I will add colored pencil there. So I'm just giving it a little bit of shading where there's already grayscale. Now you'll notice that the pattern is already showing through. I'm not going to add anything on top of that. I like how it looks just like that. Now I'm going to highlight with the white. So the opposite. Instead of going where it is darker, you go with your lighter color. In this case, I'm using my white, and I go with a light touch again and just add our little highlights in here. And you can use as many layers as you like until it looks how you would like it to look. And the thing about using a white colored pencil is that it does make it pop. Instead of using a light purple, using a white really makes it come to life. And you can have fun playing around with it. That's the joy of using adult coloring books, is that it is a creative outlet and just allows you to do things how you want. Moving on to her hair, I do like using the alcohol markers to lay down the base of the hair color, and then using my chosen colored pencils to pull in the shading and the highlights. And as before, it doesn't need to be perfect. Actually, it looks a lot nicer when there are differences in the opaqueness of your alcohol markers. So feel free to use a light hand. It's not so much like the Bold and Easy where it really shows or makes a difference if you don't get every square inch of that page colored. This lends to the texture and the beauty of your finished project. And with hair, I do like to follow the flow of the strands of hair as it's shown in the book. Just go with the flow. Now I go in with my colored pencil and really concentrate on where the shadows would be. This is my darker color, and then my highlights are going to be white unless I decide I want to try something else. So again, I'm following the flow of the hair, and I'm really just flicking the pencil. And it's just bringing a little bit of detail in. So it doesn't have to be intimidating at all. It's actually a lot of fun. So when you're coloring these types of pages, you get a feel of where your shadow would be and where her highlight would be. Along this curl, it looks like the light would be hitting around here. So you go with a lighter hand in these areas, and you go darker where the shading is already darker. That's the beauty of these books, is it tells you where to shade. It tells you where to shade. This is darker here, and this is darker here, and you pull them together, leaving it lighter in the middle. Darker here, darker here, you pull it into the middle. This creates a nice highlight where the sun would be hitting her hair. Darker, darker. It doesn't have to be perfect because there's strands of hair, so the strands will be a little bit of a mess sometimes. But you can always see a difference between the side that we've already shaded and the side that is not shaded. It really is just a few strokes of the pencil, and it really does make a difference. So same thing. For the little areas, I do a little bit darker because it's going to be behind everything. So it's behind my bow. I get a little bit heavier with my pressure. But back to this area, darker here, darker here. Wherever it's darker on your page, just use a little bit more pressure with your pencil. Just a little bit. And same for these curls here. If you want something to stand out, add a little bit of darker color behind it and underneath it to make it look like a shadow. Shadow, shadow, and just pull them into each other. This is where your shadow is going to be. A little bit of darker of the image there. follow those curls, adding a little bit of color. And you can take as much or as little time as you want with this. It doesn't have to be intimidating. Now, the highlights. I usually like to start where the highlight is most prominent. So this would be along the top here and along her bangs and the updo here. So I'm gonna start, I always start to see how that highlight looks in a small area, and I love actually how it's looking. So I'm just gonna keep on flicking. You just keep on adding a little bit of highlights with your pencil. This is the white again. White always creates a nice, fun, layered look. And already that's making a huge difference. And you can go over as many times as you want to create the lightness or the opaqueness of the pencil. So in here, maybe a little extra shine. So if you are finding that you want a little extra shine or you want a little extra highlight, you can just go back over, or you can try a different color pencil. Sometimes I like to use like a bright yellow. That does help bring some of the highlights out, but I am going to stick with this white today because it just looks so flowy and soft. You can always go back in with the first colored pencil as well and just add a few strands on top, and that adds another layer of dimension. Again, doesn't have to be perfect or neat. If you scribble outside the lines with hair or with any of this stuff, it doesn't matter. It's not about perfection. It's about using these tools to help you embrace your creativity. That's really what we're trying to do here. So I'm loving her hair like this. Beautiful. Next, we're going to move on to the eyes, and I've chosen green for the eyes. I think green looks great with the purple and also with the blondish hair. And I'm going to start with the metallic light green, or sorry, the light green, not the metallic green just yet. And I really just use a very light touch and use small little circles. It's okay if it gets on the black that's there for the pupil, because I do go over with a black gel pen or Sharpie, or even a colored pencil sometimes makes it easier to see. So already you don't even need to add any more shading to that eye, because the Greyscale does it for you. But I mean, that looks spectacular. But I do love going back over the eye just around the outside with a little bit of a darker color. Usually, especially with green or hazel eyes, you've got a ring, like actually all eyes, of a tiny bit of a darker color along the edge. It hardly even shows up, but I just love the look of it. Now, this is where I use a bright, usually yellow or white, to highlight just a tiny bit into the eye there. And that just gives it that little bit more dimension. I will show you what I do for the pupils. I go back over with this is a black colored pencil, and just lightly go over that black part, and it just gives it that little bit again. Just tops off where you've gone over with the lighter green. You can always continue on with the eyelashes as well. I like to wait until I've colored the skin to finish off her eyes, including the eyelashes. So I'm going to put that aside for now. Moving on to the skin. This is the hardest part, I believe. At least it is for me. Start with the lightest touch. You need almost no pressure. Sometimes I even like to hold my pencil weird like this and keep it at an angle, and you're really just putting down the lightest. You can go over as many times as you want, but it's just the lightest bit of pressure to start. You really want to layer this on. It may not even be showing up yet, actually. And just remember where the light is going to be hitting her face. So they've already given you shadows along the edge here and along this part and under her neck, her jawline here, and around the eyes. And a little bit under the, like above the cheeks, under the eyes. So wherever there's shading, you want to use a really light touch with the pencils. This is a very light shade. And I like to use circular motions when I'm coloring with colored pencils. So this is another layer that I'm going over with. Again, using a really light touch. It's all about layering when you're doing the skin, and using as little pressure as possible and just adding on the layers. This isn't like coloring a portrait. It isn't like drawing with colored pencils. If you were doing portraits or drawing using it for art, this is coloring, so it is a little bit different. You can go in tiny strokes if you want, but I find it puts the color down a lot easier if you're using oblong or circular strokes. So you can see her skin tone's changed a tiny bit. I'm going to start moving on to the neck and her arm. I'm going to move this up a tiny bit. Again, you don't want to use too much pressure. You don't want to burnish the ink before you've put everything down. So you do want to just use a little bit of constant pressure, but not too hard. You'll get the, once you practice a little bit, it'll be a lot easier. Using another layer. This time, where there is a shadow, I'm going over with a little bit more pressure and kind of helping to create a little bit of a deeper shade. You can see a small shadow there. That's where her nose would be, so you want to give that a little bit of a extra pressure there. And same with under her jawline here and down the front of her neck. A little bit extra pressure. Moving on to the next shade. I've already tested to make sure that these shades are compatible. So what I'm going to do is start where the shading is going to be, which is around the edge of the face, along the hairline, wherever you see that there's a little bit of shading around the eye here and here along the edge of her face. So again, tiny little circular motions. And you can see it starting to come up a little bit. The dimension, I mean. Along the side of the face, along her hairline here. And if you think that's too light, you can go over it with the dark and use your darker color to go over everything. But when you get to the part where you want it to be light, almost pick the pencil up off the page and then back down. I'm hoping that makes sense. I'm not an art teacher, so that's my sister. She's the art teacher. I just like to color. So again, you can see I'm going in here with a little bit more pressure. Also along here where her eye is going to come down here. See, she's looking better already. And a little, I do add a tiny bit under and around the bottom of the lip. I don't quite outline it, but I give it a little bit of extra attention. Okay, she's looking pretty good. Yes, I'm liking her face there. Maybe a tiny bit along here and along her eye. So I'm thinking her face is looking really nice right now, but I do want to add a tiny bit more of a shadow along some of the darker areas, like along here. So I'm using a light medium golden to add a little bit more shadow. I'm not going over the whole face with this color. I'm just going over some of the edges. And honestly, it's really just a tiny bit of wax you're depositing. It's not going to be a lot. It's almost like it's not making much of a difference, actually. I think I need to press a little harder. But again, you don't want to burnish it. You don't want it to be shiny. You don't want to apply too much pressure, because then I think I even need to go darker without being too, I want it to stay a cool kind of. This might be good. Okay. So it is a lot of trial and error. This is a deep golden. So I'm going to start with a really light hand. That's way better. This, you can actually see the shadow starting to pop out. Again, just use little light strokes. Blend it down in to the other color, just slightly. Can even go up into the hairline with this color. To create those strands of hair. Sometimes the shadows will come into the temple. So I do pull a little bit into here and down around her eye. This is not her eyeshadow, so don't deposit too much in this area because you do want that to be lighter. That's kind of where the highlight would be. So again, follow the shadows of the grayscale. Really, really light pressure. And don't worry if you have little squigglies, because I go over with the blender. If you don't have a blender, you can use a Q-tip. Or when I first started coloring, I was just using my fingers, but it's a lot easier to use a Q-tip. Let's use the blender. So I'm going to blend her face and gently just blend. I'm going to move this back a little bit. There we go. And honestly, same thing. Really light touch. Hold it on an angle so it gets the flatter edge. Just blending those colors together takes a little bit of the edge off. And again, make sure you are using a really light touch over the areas that are going to remain light, so you don't transfer any of the wax or the pigment onto the other areas. So do remember just to, you can lift this thing up, you can move it around. Looks like I've got a little bit too much there, but that's okay. I'll show you how I use my pastels after to lighten her face. She looks pretty cute. I'm gonna go in with a tiny bit of pink. You can do this, you can choose not to do this, it's entirely up to you. I do like to add a tiny, it's almost not showing. It's very, very light. And you can do a little bit on her nose, however you like. But the grayscale images are not intimidating at all. I love how they look. So she's looking pretty cute. I'm going to use a little pink up here actually. Just a tiny bit along the highlight area. You can play around. I've actually watched a couple of YouTube videos that you can color a face with yellow, red, and blue. So I've been trying that as well, but I do like using the skin tones first. Okay, we are going to add a tiny bit of highlight with the chalk pastel. And I like to add a tiny bit of a highlight, say under her eye here and on this side. I know there is a shadow, a little bit of a shadow there, but that's kind of where I put her, the little bit of pink, but I want to kind of bring her eyes out a tiny bit. So think about when you're applying makeup, or when you see those girls on TikTok applying their makeup, how they put a little bit of highlight there. So I'm going to use my blending stump again, and because this is a chalk, it does sit very much on the top, so I'm just kind of rubbing it in a tiny bit, and then you blow it off. Amazing. She looks great. I want to show you another trick that I've learned while coloring eyes. I started out using gray, but the eyes looked really dirty, so I'm now using the tiniest little bit of pink in each corner in a semicircular shape. So following the shape of the eyeball in each corner like that. it's almost not visible. But when you take your blending stump, when you take your blender, I'm going to stop calling it a blending stump. I'm going to call it the blender. And gently smudge that out. It makes it look like an actual eye. And it's really just a little dot of color. And again, you want to follow the contours that are there. So I'm going to start with the top lip. I leave a little bit at the top where I don't color after I outline. So leave a tiny bit where there will be a little bit of a shine. And for your bottom, same. I need to sharpen this. And do the same for the bottom. Where it's darker, go over with a little bit more pressure. I like to do layers with these. Follow the shape, lightly outline it, and then I kind of use little pulses to fill it in around that shine. So it kind of remains, it looks like actual shiny lip. And same for the top. And then you can pull lighter streaks through. Maybe a tiny bit more here. Really just pressing the pencil into the page a tiny bit. But the grayscale image really just does work for you. Using my Sharpie brush tip, I'm going to go in and outline very carefully that shine on the pupil and maybe add another little glare there. That looks nice. I don't want to do too much. Now on the lips, my trick is little dots kind of not in a row. Take your finger and pull it down a little bit, or pull it away. Smudge it a tiny bit. And then go over it as you need to. Oh, that's so cute. And guys, she's done. Wait, belt. You forgot her belt. We're gonna leave her like this. So guys, we just colored this whole page. Looks stunning, and we used a variety of coloring tools, and the results are lovely. It was an easy, fun, non-intimidating way to enjoy your adult coloring books. So don't be afraid to experiment with what works for you. Just have fun with it, and I hope you find coloring to be relaxing and enjoyable, because that's how it should be. If it is intimidating, just take your time and get to know what you like to do. I love these coloring books. I think they are so beautiful, and the results are worth spending a little bit of time and using different mediums to get the look that you want. I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. I'm not great at teaching, but just seeing somebody else coloring the pages sometimes makes it a little easier. Just have fun with it. Have fun. That's really the name of the game. If you have any questions or any comments about coloring adult coloring books, please leave a comment below and I will do my best to get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.